Hello friends, and welcome to this edition of a Walk in the Garden Bible study. This is part 2 in our study of Genesis chapter 46. And if you recall from our last lesson, we were looking at the account of Joseph sending his brothers back into Canaan. They were going there to retrieve their father and retrieve all of their family. And basically he sent them with provisions, he sent them with wagons, he sent them with all the comforts and foods and other things that they would need to make the journey. And they were going to bring his whole family back into Egypt so they could withstand the effects of that 7-year famine that they were enduring. They were actually just 2 years into. And that's where we left off, and we saw where Jacob had made that final decision to make the journey. He packed up what they could. They took what they could. They took their family, all the children and grandchildren, and everybody was traveling with them. And then we left off seeing where they stopped by the area of Beersheba. And we saw it was there that he had offered worship to the Lord, and the Lord had communicated with them and just reaffirmed his covenant and reaffirmed his promise and just told him that there was nothing to fear because he was with him and that he was in this thing. And we were talking about how the fact that it was kind of ironic because now the very brother that all his brothers had shunned and tried to do away with, and they sold him into slavery and so forth, was now responsible for their welfare. But also the fact that it was going to be this more or less enemy nation or this heathenistic nation is where they were going to find their comfort and find their provision. And God was going to use this place to sustain them, the fledgling nation now of Israel in its very infancy. God was going to sustain them in the land of Egypt. And so it's an amazing plan, and it's an amazing thing to see how God brings things together in order to accomplish his will. And in many cases, probably in most cases, it's never in the way that we would expect it to be so, because that's God. That's the way he operates, and that's the way he's going to get the glory through every situation. And so with that, we're going to pick up kind of a lengthy little passage here, but it all ties together. We're going to be looking at verses 5 through 27. And here the Bible says, "And Jacob rose up from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried Jacob, their father, and their little ones, and their wives in the wagons which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. And they took their cattle and their goods, which they had gotten in the land of Canaan, and came into Egypt, Jacob and all his seed with him, his sons and his sons' sons with him, his daughters and his sons' daughters, and all his seed brought he with him into Egypt. And these are the names of the children of Israel which came into Egypt: Jacob and his sons, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, and the sons of Reuben, Hanok, and Phalu, and Hezron, and Carmi, and the sons of Salmon, Jemuel, and Jamin, and Ohad, and Jachin, and Zohar, and Shaul, the son of the Canaanitish woman, and the sons of Levi, Gershon, Kohath, Merari, and the sons of Judah, and Onan, and Shelah, and Pharez, and Zerah. But and Onan died in the land of Canaan. And the sons of Pharez were Hezron and Hamul. And the sons of Issachar, Tola, and Phuvah, and Job, and Shimron. And the sons of Zebulun, Sered, and Elon, and Jehiel. These be the sons of Leah, which she bare unto Jacob in Pandanaram, with his daughter Dinah. All the souls of his sons and daughters were 33. And the sons of Gad, Ziphion, and Haggai, Shuniad, Ezbon, Eri, and Aradai, and Aradai. And the sons of Asher, Jimnah, and Ishbaer, Herbur, Malchiel. These are the sons of Zippah, whom Laban gave to Leah his daughter, and these she bare unto Jacob, even 16 souls. The sons of Rachel, Jacob's wife, Joseph and Benjamin, and unto Joseph in the land of Egypt were born Manasseh and Ephraim, which Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On, bare unto him. And the sons of Benjamin were Bela and Becher and Ashbeel, Jerah and Naaman, Ehi and Rosh, Mupian, Hupian, and Ard. These are the sons of Rachel, which were born unto Jacob. All the souls were 14. And the sons of Dan, Hushim, and Jezer, and Shillem. These are the sons of Bilhah, which Laban gave unto Rachel his daughter, and she bare these unto Jacob. All the souls were 7. All the souls that came with Jacob into Egypt, which came out of his loins, besides Jacob's sons' wives, all the souls were 66. And the sons of Joseph, which were born him in Egypt, were 2 souls. All the souls of the house of Jacob, which came in Egypt, were 70. Well, that was quite a few names I tried to utter there, and I'm sure I butchered up a few of them, but you get the gist of it is, God is showing the lineage of Israel. And this is the fledgling nation at this time. And there's no doubt that Jacob had figured on spending the rest of his remaining days in Canaan. He really hadn't been counting on taking another trip. He hadn't been counting on taking a journey anywhere, especially a long journey such as this. But the events had changed, and it was in his family's best interest to take Joseph up on his offer for looking after them and meeting their needs and looking out for their well-being. And we saw that last time, that it was a tough decision. Not only just to uproot, not only to leave your homeland, your possessions, and all your familiarity behind, but and to go into a foreign country, and especially into a country where you're not necessarily going to be well liked. But it was God's plan, and he realized that, and he understood how God was using Joseph to look out for their welfare. And when he finally understood that, and then, as I said before, he got into Egypt, he stopped along the way to worship God and to sacrifice unto God. And God not only met his needs, but God also spoke to him there and just reaffirmed and confirmed that this was the right thing to do, and that there was nothing to fear, that God was going to take care of him. And so after we see that they sojourned there at Beersheba for a short time, now we see, what did we see? It says they rose up and made tracks to go into Egypt. And what does it tell us? It says, and the sons of Israel carried Jacob their father and their little ones and their wives in the wagons which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. And so it was that his entire clan was now removing from one place to another. And not only that, but they would bring their cattle and their goods as well. And they were going to get fulfillment from Egypt, but they would not come with empty hands. They weren't just going to leave everything behind. And that was kind of the indication that Pharaoh had given them, or at least that Joseph had given them, is just leave all your stuff there. Just abandon it and just come yourselves, because we're going to take care of you. But they didn't want to come that way. They didn't want to come as beggars. They didn't want to come as dependents, that they were coming into the country with nothing to offer, because they were bringing a total of 70 people, which was a good amount of people that were going to be, using some of the resources there. They were going to be using some of, putting a little bit of a burden on the country in addition to the people that were already there. And they were outsiders. They were people that were not illegal immigrants, but they were immigrants. And so they were coming in, and they didn't want to come in empty-handed. So they brought their things with them. And that was a big entourage. 70 people with all of their belongings, with all of their cattle and all the animals they had to take care of. And it was just a big undertaking. And then especially with the little ones, the little children, it says they brought their little ones with them, their wives, and all that they had. But as the Scripture does, often the Bible takes time to pause here and takes the space to relate to us the lineage of Israel. And as we discussed before, there's no wasted space in the Bible. I mean, it's inexhaustible, but God made use of every sentence. He made use of every word, and he made use of every page. Every space in the Bible is well used, and every space is important for a purpose that serves a purpose to speak to us on behalf of what God wants to relate to us in his message. And in this case, it's the very specific to define the descendants of Israel. It reminds us of this heritage, of his heritage, which will carry on his legacy when he is gone. All of his descendants, all of the souls, all of it says his seed, were all represented there. And, we have some modern day family reunion. I mean, it used to be a really popular thing to have a family reunion. And people don't necessarily stay in their same hometowns like they once did. They don't necessarily stay in a small confined area where they're all close by and nearby and can see each other on a daily basis. But nowadays, it's everybody just spreads out, throughout the country. They go where the jobs are. They might want to move to a better climate. They might want to go to school somewhere. They might join the military. I mean, it could be anything. And every now and then, not all families do it, but some families still elect to have a family reunion. And it's just an appointed time. They reach out to everybody. They notify everybody ahead of time. They put the word out. And they say, on this particular day, we're going to have a gathering. We're going to get everybody together so we can just see each other again. We can fellowship with each other, have dinner together, possibly have just some time spent, maybe play some games, and just get to know each other basically once again, and to take some pictures. And it's always interesting to see the hierarchy, because usually there's going to be a patriarch there. There's going to be the elders there, the eldest of the clan, maybe the grandfathers or the great-grandparents are going to be there. And it's really interesting to see the length and the breadth and the depth of their lineage. And it's really an amazing thing to see how one family can spread out and multiply into such a big, what we'd call a clan. And so that's what Jacob here has his clan, and it's to the number of 70. And so it gives us all of their names. And it gives us even some of the wives' names. It gives us some of the children's and the grandchildren's names. And what do we see? We see, first of all, it tells us about Reuben. And if you remember, Reuben was Jacob's firstborn. And then it goes on to tell us about the other sons that he has: Simon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Gad, Asher, Joseph, Benjamin, and Dan, and Naphtali. These were the sons of Israel. And the narrative goes on to list their sons as well, but it's thus, at this time, the entire future of this fledgling nation would be held in the balance in Egypt. Why? Well, they had to endure this great famine. I mean, there was a threat. There was a real threat to their livelihoods, but also to their very lives. And in essence, if it wasn't for God's provision and God's protection, they could they could be wiped out, and that would erase the entire possibility of going down and fulfilling the prophecies that God's laid out. But we know that God's not going to allow that to happen, and He has a plan. And so this is His plan, and as we talked about before, when it came to Isaac, he was forbidden to go into the land of Egypt during the famine, but in this case, Jacob's encouraged to go into the land, or he's directed to go into the land of Egypt for his benefit. So it can go either way. And if we're listening, as we talked about, if we're listening to God's voice, and we're in tune with God, and we're following Him and walking with Him, and we're fellowshipping with Him, and as we also looked at the fact that if we acknowledge Him, acknowledge God in all of our ways, then the Bible gives us a promise. It says He will direct our paths. And sometimes we don't know, the pathways may not be the pathways we've designed. It may not be within our plans. It may not be something that we've scoped out and mapped out. But if it's God's will, if it's God's desire, then that's going to ultimately be the best beneficial way to go. And if it's for our protection, for our betterment, but ultimately it's to give God the glory, and it's to accomplish His will. So with that, we're going to pick it up here in these next verses of chapter 46 and see if we can go ahead and finish out this chapter. And this is verses 28 through 34. And the Bible says, "And he sent Judah before him unto Joseph to direct his face unto Goshen. And Joseph made ready his chariot, and went up to meet Israel his father to Goshen, and presented himself unto him. And he fell on his neck, and wept on his neck a good while. And Israel said unto Joseph, Now let me die, since I have seen thy face, because thou art yet alive. And Joseph said unto his brethren and unto his father's house, I will go up and show Pharaoh, and say unto him, My brethren and my father's house, which were in the land of Canaan, are come unto me. And the men are shepherds, for their trade hath been to feed cattle, and they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. And it shall come to pass, when Pharaoh shall call you, and shall say, What is your occupation? that ye shall say, Thy servant's trade hath been about cattle from our youth even until now, both we and also our fathers, that ye may dwell in the land of Goshen. For every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. Well, again, for whatever reason, the Egyptians just don't like shepherds. And they knew that. And that's why they had to go to this special part of the country to kind of be out of the mix. But also, they wanted to definitely get Pharaoh's blessing on the matter. But finally, at long last, we see this tender reunion between Joseph and his father. And notice how Jacob precedes the meeting. He sends Judah before him to give him notice of his arrival in Goshen. This was not only to make him aware that they were there and they were present and that they made the journey, but also to announce their presence in the land. And it was a form of respect to the governor, not just Joseph as his son, and not just taking it for granted that, well, my son said I could stay here, so, but recognizing him for his position, that he is the governor over all the land. He's second in command only under Pharaoh. And as coming into the land, as such, they'll be basically subject to the laws of the land. And so they wanted to make sure they were coming in legally. We hear a lot today about immigration and illegal immigration, legal immigration. Well, there are directives put in place by most countries on, if you need to get a passport, for instance, to enter their country. If you need to get a visa to spend a certain amount of time in the country. If you have to have certain permissions and, certain directives from the government there and their permission, you might say. But to make it legal and to be in good standing with them, then that's what you do. You don't try to come in through the back door or under the cover and try to sneak in and try to establish yourself without being there legally, because in most cases it won't turn out well. But they were also making this announcement to confirm that they weren't intruders, but rather that they were invited guests. And so then what do we see next? We see Joseph's immediate response. What does it say? It says he made ready his chariot and went up to meet Israel his father to Goshen and presented himself unto him. Well, that would definitely have to be a tender meeting. I mean, Jacob had thought all this time that Joseph was dead. He knew he was dead, and we couldn't imagine the traumatic. We saw last time where he almost passed out, it seems like, and was just taken back when he heard the news. He was just couldn't believe it. And it took him a while to kind of recover from that and revive himself to get over the shock of finding out that Joseph was still alive. But I could only imagine the travel and the anticipation that was taking place and just the desire to see his son once again after all these years of being separated, but also of just thinking that he was no more, and then now learning that he was alive and doing well. And I'm sure they couldn't make that trip fast enough to be able to attend this reunion meeting. But we see that Joseph took off immediately, went up to meet him, and in spite of his position, he still, in return, showed respect and reverence for his father. What does it say? It says he presented himself to him. And he did it in a respectful way, because with his position, he could have sent a courier. Or he could have said, no, my father's got to come to me. Or he could have been haughty about it. But he humbled himself, and he showed up in person. And there's nothing that shows more, humbleness, but also respect and dignity than making a personal appearance. How does somebody feel when you say you learn the president, or say the vice president, or maybe even the governor's coming to town, and you heard they're going to be speaking somewhere, but then maybe you're in your job, or maybe you're at a school, and they show up in person, and perhaps they even come down and speak to you and shake your hand. Well, there's nothing to compare to that. There's nothing to compare as if you watch them on the TV or hear them on the radio or see them from afar. But when they show up in person and they personalize it by coming to you, even with their big, their high position, that makes all the difference in the world. And it's just a way that you're showing respect for them, but in return, they're showing respect for you, and they're showing their genuine concern and care, and their genuine just overview of that they want to be there for you, and that they really want to do it on a personal level. And that's what Joseph's doing here. So he makes ready his provisions, and he shows up in person, and it says he presented himself to him. And then the next thing we see is the rekindling of their spirits. What does it tell us? It says he fell on his neck, and not just a slight kiss and then backing off and leaving but it says he stayed there for a while. It says he wept on his neck a good while. Wow, what a scene. What a reunion. And what an emotional time in this family's lives. And that would be something we could probably learn from. That's something we don't see too much done nowadays. I mean, people have become so indifferent, and maybe in some cases so cold towards each other. And just, we don't see that type of care or I don't know if the word would be familiarity, but just the closeness, if you will, of even some family members nowadays. We just don't see that to that degree like we once did. And I think it's just a culture that, this modern culture we've raised up in, and a lot of times, we don't want to show emotion, we don't want to put things on public display, and we don't want to show a tender moment, we get embarrassed about it. But it says he wept on his neck a good while. So there was that tender moment that was going to last, and they just wanted to hold each other. They just wanted to be close together again. And they wanted to share this glad reunion day together. And so we see that Jacob's satisfaction was now fulfilled. Because as we said last time, this was, in modern terms, this was on his bucket list. He wanted to see Joseph before he died. And what does he tell us here? He says, let me die. He says, let me die. Now that I know you're alive, Joseph, now that I've seen your face at last, my heart is full. I'm at total peace. I have nothing else to live for, basically. I have nothing else to fulfill. This is fulfilled. My heart is full. And I'm more than ready for my departure. And Jacob saw no need to expect any more in this world. He was perfectly ready to die immediately, although he would live another 17 years. So he didn't know that. He probably felt like his time had come. He felt like, well, this is the last leg of the journey he's going to make. This is the last great thing accomplishment that's going to happen in his life. And he felt fulfilled. But this is just another reminder that death is not something we can forecast. We can't forecast. I mean, obviously, if somebody commits suicide, they've set their own timing or their own appointment, but that's not to be. And we're to fulfill. We don't know when God's going to call us home, and we don't know what His appointment date is for us. We don't know when we've accomplished. We may think we've accomplished everything that we're going to do, but there may be still one yet leg of our journey that hasn't been fulfilled yet. So it's all in God's timing. It all revolves around our appointment with death, but God sets the appointment. And so the next thing we see is Joseph's careful care to ensure his family are cared for properly and for their safety and welfare, the fact that that's going to be secured. He knows the traditions and excuse me. He knows the laws of the land. And he knows, as outsiders, that they will need to be able to meld in effectively with the society. He knows he needs to present them before Pharaoh and receive his approval in the matter. And his family needs to be sanctioned. They need to have his protection. They need to have Pharaoh's blessing on the matter. And the people that are around them, and the people they might come in contact with, need to be aware that they are sanctioned by Pharaoh. And they're not to be mistreated or treated unfairly. And he intends for them to dwell in the land of Goshen and live separately from the mainstream population because of the fact that they are shepherds by occupation. And Goshen would naturally be more thinly populated and possibly have, whatever pasture land there is would have more available and be even beyond that be slightly closer to Canaan. So it had some advantages, and he knew the lay of the land, and he'd mapped this out, and he knew that this would be the best place for them to dwell. But here we see one more interesting fact about the Egyptians, and that is the fact that the shepherds weren't just disdained or just disliked by the Egyptians, but it tells us they were an abomination. In other words, they were disgusting to them. They couldn't stand shepherds for whatever reason. They looked upon shepherds with contempt, and they would have nothing to do with them and would shun them at all costs. And yet Joseph was not going to require them to change their lifestyle or give up their livelihoods. He would take their case before Pharaoh and get his approval on the matter to keep things, but he was going to keep things on the level and above board. He wasn't going to try to hide what they were or try to have them lie about it, tell them they were actually something else. Some countries will look down upon people. There was one particular country that was taken over by what I would consider an evil regime, and they basically were looking down on anybody that indicated they had any kind of an education or educated position, or that was in some kind of a job perhaps or occupation that required a college degree. They would look down on that. They would go beyond look down on that. In some cases, they would punish you or even put you to death because of it. And so many people had to try to convince them that they weren't doctors or lawyers or educators or anything like that, but they were just simple cab drivers or merchantmen or whatever the case. And they had to try to convince them that they didn't do that true occupation they did in order to preserve themselves and save their lives. Well, this wasn't quite to that point, but it could possibly make their lives a lot more miserable, if they stay with their current occupation. So they could have done that, but Joseph said, no, I want you to be above board. We've already convinced, I already went through that whole scenario where you had to convince me that you were true men, and now we're going to convince Pharaoh that we're true men and that we're telling him the truth. So Joseph's going to go present them before Pharaoh and tell him that my family's here, they've settled in Goshen, and they are shepherds, but they've been shepherds their whole lives. That is their trade, that is their occupation. And they've been shepherds from their youth up, and that's just their livelihood. And he also instructs them how to respond should Pharaoh call out to them and ask them what their occupation is, to make sure that they don't tell him some other occupation that they're not involved with in order to protect themselves. He says, this is how you need to respond should he call them forth to give an account of themselves, that they would proudly answer about their occupation, that it's their heritage, it's their long-standing trade, and that is how they make their living. And the note here is that it's better to be the credit of a lowly position that is honest and admirable rather than the shame of a high position that is unseemly. Well, we could certainly talk more about that, especially if it came to politics or some of the things along those lines. But we'll leave that be. In our next lesson, we're going to pick it up. We'll be in our study of Genesis chapter 47. And there we're going to see that, that Joseph's going to follow through on that. We're going to see him present his family before Pharaoh. And then we'll see what the next step's going to be in this new environment that they find themselves in now. And we hope to see you again soon. Hope you're having a great day. We'll talk to you then. Take care.